things. I'm really pleased to introduce to you and to welcome to the Huntsman School of Business at Utah State University, Professor Mike Hitt, who is the Joe V. Foster Chair at Texas A&M University and is literally, and this is a great, great privilege, literally one of the nation's, the world's foremost authorities on strategic management, entrepreneurship. His scholarship is cited virtually more than anybody else's in the country, and we're very, very privileged to have him here today. We've had the chance to get to know him a little bit with dinner last night and this morning with a faculty seminar. His interests are wide-ranging. He got his undergraduate and MBA degree from Texas Tech. He's originally from Odessa, Texas. Then went to Colorado to take a job at the Samsonite Corporation. Some of you will remember that brand. And while he was at Samsonite, working in corporate strategy, got very, very interested in issues like mergers and acquisitions, strategic alliance partners, governance issues at the board level. And so enrolled in a Ph.D. program at the University of Colorado, where he focused on organizations and also business policy. So coming out of that organizational behavior approach, but also with a heavy influence in economic training and business strategy, has evolved over his career into a focus on strategic management, entrepreneurship, and in the last 20 years, roughly, very significant focus on international. And we've had a lot of fun exploring his interest in international entrepreneurial and strategic behavior. And he knows about the tremendous commitment that we're making in that area as well. This is going to be a great pleasure to hear from Mike today, and I hope you'll join me in giving a good Aggie welcome to another Aggie from Texas, Professor Mike Hitt.
Well, it is a pleasure to be on another Aggie campus, to come from one Aggie campus to another. And so definitely a pleasure to be here with you today and to talk about this topic of strategic leadership. It's actually something that I hope comes through, that I believe in fairly strongly. And I will tell you that although this talk was developed specifically for you, there are parts of this that I have used or given to a whole series of different places in the world, as well as to executives. So I want you to know this is not something that just frivolous and kind of what I did by the way. It is something that I really believe in strongly. And what I'm going to talk about then is, you can see the title, but strategic leadership in the 21st century, which is where we are. And I actually became very interested in this topic a number of years ago, back in the 1990s. You were just children then, but I've been around for a long time. And I became very interested in it as I look at strategy and the people who deal with strategy and who make strategic decisions in all kinds of organizations, certainly businesses, because that's where I focus most of my work and most of my observation, but also in all other kinds of organizations as well. So we're going to focus a little bit on this and what it means, and I'll try to underline a few key points. I won't be able to go through everything in an hour, but hopefully we'll emphasize some things that will make you think. Probably I hope tie into the things that you are studying now and or make you think in the future. And then there's another reason that I'm talking about this with you, and that's because you are future strategic leaders. And so you are the ones that are going to be carrying this banner. You're going to be the ones out there making those major decisions in the future. And so this is an important topic for you at least to think about, because you are the future strategic leaders. In fact, with that, what I'm going to do is say, I'll start with this, use a quote from H.G. Wells. You may not know who he is. He's a futurist that's written a lot of books, and interestingly, he wrote a long time ago, a lot of things that he talked about have come to pass. maybe not exactly in the format that he described, but very similarly and at a time when you wouldn't have expected some of his predictions. So the past is but the beginning of the beginning. In other words, you do need to learn from the past. History is important, but it's only the beginning that you start from there on, and that's where you're headed. You're headed to the future, and you are the future. And so given that, I'd like you to look at this. If you look 10 years out, you know, and you think about, say you were on a board of directors of a major company, what do you think that this future is going to look like? What are the characteristics of these organizations? What are the strategies you think will be employed in 2020? How will they manage the human capital, the human element in organizations? And what will be required for long-term success? You know, you think about today in our economic situation we're going through and look out 10 years. It's just 10 years. That's not that long. So, but I'll lay you odds it'll be an exciting time, and you're going to be in positions out there making decisions that will be leading us into that future. So let's talk a little bit about it. I'm going to use a quote that I like. This comes from Tom Friedman. You mentioned one of his books. It isn't because it's from Friedman that it's here, but it's because of the quote that I like. This is an African proverb. And it actually, he describes this was an African proverb that was posted on a bulletin board in a manufacturing plant in Beijing, China. Now, you look at this and what it tells you. And, you know, I'm gonna read, you can read it, but I'm going to go through because I want to talk about it briefly. Every morning in Africa, a gazelle wakes up and it knows it must run faster than the fastest lion or it will be killed. Every morning, a lion wakes up and it knows it must outrun the slowest gazelle or it's going to starve to death. So it doesn't matter whether you're a lion or gazelle. When you get up in the morning, you better start running. Now, the interesting in this, there's a twist on this that I want to mention. Now, this tells you that in a global competitive environment, I don't care whether you come from a developed country like the U.S., or an emerging market like Vietnam or somewhere else, you better start running because you have to compete against those countries and those firms in those countries. Whether you go into their environment, into their markets, or they're in your markets, or you're not even competing directly, I can guarantee you, you still have to be concerned about it. But let me give you the twist on this. There was a commercials developed. My daughter is in advertising, and I was talking to her one day about this quote. She saw this quote, and she said, you know, our agency has an account with a major Korean manufacturer, automobile manufacturer. And they have a version of this that's a little different. And what it does, it's an advertising, and she sent me a copy of it. And I thought about putting it in here, but I didn't do this. I'll just tell you briefly what it does. It shows look like it's probably in Africa. It may or may not be, but it shows a gazelle in the first frame, and the gazelle is sitting, kind of eating grass or something, and then it perks its head up like it's heard something, and then it just takes off running, and then the next frame you see the lion, and the lion standing there looking, and then all of a sudden it's like he sees something, and he takes off running. And so then it goes through various clips going back and forth between the gazelle and the lion, assuming that the lion is chasing this gazelle. The last frame, the gazelle catches up with the lion and knocks it down and stands up and roars. It's I think it's very funny. Of course, then it cuts to the product, and what they're trying to tell you is we may be the Korean manufacturer of this automobile. We may not be number one, but we're going to get you. We're coming after all the Toyotas and so on. Now, what I do think this tells you is a little bit about this global competitive landscape. Again, it's a take on this, but another idea of this global competitive landscape and what we may see in 2020. You see it today, you may see it even more in 2020. So you keep this in mind as we talk about some of these other points. Now, what I'd like to do is talk about the first decade just a little bit. It's been an exciting time. I'm not going to go into a lot of depth here, but I'm going to point out a few things that I think kind of form a basis to make us think about what we need to do for the next 10 years and beyond. First, there clearly had been high environmental turbulence in the first 10 years of the 21st century, the first decade. I mean, obviously, we know we've been through 2 economic recessions in the U.S., and those recessions are broader than the U.S., certainly the last one. The other was too, but the second one is really on a global basis, and although it affected countries in different degrees and different amounts, it's there. But we've had high and turbulence in other ways too, as we know, political and so on. So you've got the political volatility, the global economic volatility, and technological development. And a lot of this has been positive. You know, I was struck, I don't know if you saw this, but earlier this year, Fortune put out a special issue, and in this they named the CEO of the decade. Anybody know who that is? No, it wasn't Jack Welch, although he probably would have been the CEO of a previous decade. He really would have been, and he's well thought of. Steve Jobs. And what they noted about Jobs is his firm, of course, talking about Apple, has in total transformed 4 different industries, and 3 of those they transformed in this decade. 3. Through introducing new technology-based products and have transformed industries. Now, that's one company, that's one person, and that's one company. What this tells you is that, what I've heard for many years, is that we're in a cycle of technology development that only continues to increase. You know, soon we won't be carrying laptops. I got a laptop too, so I mean, I don't like that because I'm so wedded to my laptop. Of course, a lot of you are wedded to something else in your hands that you carry around, you know, the phone, the iPhone, or the others like it. But technology is important. So all these things. Think about what the technology will be in 10 years. What will be the primary means of what we do, communication, and actually analytical and otherwise. How do we transmit information? How do we hold and carry information? Very important to think about. But there's been another thing that I've observed, and frankly this is not new, is that there's been a focus on the short term in many businesses. Now I'm going to tell you that every company is only focused on the short term. I don't want to denigrate all the executives, et cetera, but I think there's a focus that has occurred on short term. And there are probably many reasons for this, but I'll give you one kind of stark example. A few years ago, I brought a CEO in to talk to my executive MBA class. And I had to ask him to come to this class to specifically talk about governance and how he dealt with his relationship with the board. And in that time, in the last week, you have to set this up a long time ahead of time, you know, to get a CEO and clear his schedule. And even then you worry because other things can come up that he might have to deal with and couldn't come. I've had that happen on more than one occasion, and it's not their fault. They're CEO of a company and they have to deal with that if that's important. But in this case, I picked up the paper a few days before he was supposed to come to my class and read the headlines and found out that he had resigned his job. Now that's a real nice way of saying the board had asked him to resign. So here's a CEO coming to my class. I asked him to talk about how he builds a relationship with his board, and the board has just fired him. Well, that's one thing that crossed my mind. Oh, man. And then 2, will he come? I didn't know what to do. I couldn't get a hold of him because the only address and the connection I had was through the company. So I decided to just wait and see if he came. And he did come. He came at the appointed time. And of course, I had no idea what he would talk about. But he came in and he was very, very honest. Now this person, the reason he was asked, is he had been a very successful executive. He'd been a successful executive with another major corporation, and now he was CEO of this major company. So he had a track record of success. And I had a number of recommendations on him as well, people that knew him, and that he was a fine person as well as excellent. So he came in and started talking, and I let him go, and he said, look, I know most of you have probably heard the news and that I lost my job this week. And he said, let me tell you what happened, and let me tell you why. He said, I made some errors, and my basic error was that I got so wrapped up in trying to do things that would make our stock price look better in the next quarter that I was doing the wrong things. And I knew it in my gut I was doing the wrong thing. But I got so much wrapped up in that cycle, and the board was pushing him to do this too, because the stockholders, mainly institutional shareholders, were pushing him to get that stock price up. And rather than, he said, rather than taking the actions that I knew would probably improve that stock price over the long term, but it would be more evolutionary and grow, I chose this short-term approach, and it was the wrong approach to take. He said, if I ever get the chance again, I guarantee you I won't do it. Now, what I liked about that is he was so honest. Well, one, that he came. I thought that was, it took courage to do that, given everybody had to know what had happened to him. And he was so open and honest about it, about what happened and why, and that he made errors. And he admitted those errors. And in fact, the students told me after that was the best class. I needed to have more people like that and quit talking so much, But they said that was the best visitor and one of the best classes that they had, that they learned a lot from that, because they had a person with a lot of experience. So he's just an example of this kind of short-term approach. Again, some have not done this, but it has been something that's happened for a long time. Stockholders versus stakeholders. Here's the thing, all I want to argue is I don't believe any way negative about stockholders. I'm in a business school, I'm in a strategy position, I believe we need to work for stockholders. But I also believe that there are other stakeholders that you have to be concerned about, and you have to find a way to balance those to some degree. Now, let me just use an example you talk about the issues of sustainability and greening today. If you talk, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you wouldn't find there were people talking about it, but it hadn't made its way into corporate boardrooms and executive suites for the most part. Today, literally you can't walk in there without them talking about this because they believe it's important. So what they're doing is that, they believe that this actually serves their stockholders over time. Now, all I'm trying to do is saying when maybe sometimes it's not as popular, you got to find a way to balance this, and I'll go back to this executive as he talked, that you have to communicate and convince. He said, what I need to do is I needed to convince that board of the things we needed to do. Instead, I just did the things in the wrong way. I needed to really have a more powerful argument and convince them what to do. And this is the same thing here, is convincing, not saying it's stakeholders in place of stockholders, it's in addition to, with them. And then there's another thing that has occurred called hubris, and that's kind of an academic term, comes from, actually started that use of that term in our language anyway, or at least in the business language, started with a finance scholar several years ago. But what this means is you believe you can do things that other people can't do, if you look at the executive suite, and that you'll take risks that maybe you shouldn't take. You don't see the risk, and the risk is there, and you probably can't really do it. And so it's kind of this exaggerated self-confidence. It's not saying you shouldn't have confidence. You really do need confidence. It's just that it shouldn't be exaggerated to a point that you do things you shouldn't do. And, again, I wish I could have time. I could talk about several examples of that. But what you do find is that when you find executives, and I'm talking about making strategic decisions now, because realize my frame is on strategy and strategic decisions. If you find them doing this, they sometimes will take excessive risks because they don't necessarily see the risk. They think they can do it. All right, so that leads them to do things to get those gains that they're unlikely to obtain. I would suggest that in some cases, this is what you've seen in recent times in certain kinds of maybe in some places in the financial sector and so on, if you look at some of the things that have been done. I don't believe that this is the only reason, but there's another thing that would say to you that some have argued in recent times, that there's a little bit of a greed going on here in terms of some of the top executives. This again does not suggest all top executives are bad. I don't believe that. I know a number of them for whom I have a really high regard and respect, and they're good people as well. But when this happens, and if it happens collectively, and I also will say to you that we know one thing in this area is a strategy, is that what happens in one firm in an industry, particularly if it's a leader, you'll see other firms in that industry follow. Even when they know it's wrong sometimes, they don't think it's going to work out, they'll follow. There's a lot of this industry imitation that does occur, and you watch it, you'll see it. Now, what I'm telling you this for is don't do that. When you're in an executive suite, don't follow it just because someone else is doing it. Know that when you take an action, it's a right action to take, not because somebody else is doing it. And again, you get the greed causes executives to pursue strategies that are in their own self-interest rather than in the firm, and of course, ethically challenged. And that's just the nicest way maybe to put some of these things that may happen. And again, I don't want to sell all executives as bad, because they're not. Again, I know a number of top executives that have really strong positive values for whom I respect. But we know a few can lead us down the wrong path. And you put these three things together, hubris, greed, and if they are ethically challenged, and that is a mixture for disaster in effect. Now, let's just say we've had problems, obviously, but now that doesn't mean we can't. And see, all these people, when I talk about strategic leadership, I do want to mention this. Well, obviously, I'm talking about people at the top, in the top suites, the executives, the top executive team. But I would tell you the things that I'm going to mention today, you don't have to be at the top of the organization to practice. And in fact, should practice it in other stages, other levels, and other types of jobs. You don't have to be at the top to do the things we're going to talk about. So, I'm telling you, because you're not going to start probably at the top unless you start your own organization, which you may do. But you will get there, and if you do some of the things we talk about, you're going to have a high probability of getting at the top, and then you'll do the right things. So let's talk about what this is. First, vision. Now, when I talk to executives, one of the first things I talk to them about is vision. Now, you can think about, why do we talk about that? Well, one thing I talk about vision is to get them out of this short-term focus, is to make them look out a ways. I don't really think you have to look out tremendous, but at least 3 to 5 years. Look out and say, what do I want this company or my unit to be in 3 to 5 years? What should we be doing at that time? What are goals? What do we want to accomplish at that period of time? Rather than taking even a 1-year approach. You certainly would work back and say, well, what do I have to do in this 1 year to accomplish my goals 5 years out? And by the way, there are companies, not generally in the U.S., that have even longer term visions. There are a few Japanese firms that have 200-year visions, 100-year and 200-year visions. Now, I have to admit, I can't see out quite that far. So I couldn't do this, and I don't know how they do it. On the other hand, I applaud them for trying to look out and trying to look to the future and saying what we want to be. And I would encourage not anybody to try to look out, unless you want to, 100 or 200 years, but to try to look out. What personally you want to do that, but you want to do that for your organization as well. So vision is a part of this. A global mindset is another. Obviously, you're doing things in this school to do that, to help you kind of gain this global mindset. But let me talk about this and why it's important. Obviously, companies are moving into international markets from, say, the U.S., from other countries. They're moving into other international markets, including the U.S. market. So we have a lot of this where we have a global economy. We're interrelated, that we briefly mentioned earlier. But more than that, I'd say you have to have a global mindset no matter what you do. I don't care if you're running a small enterprise that's domestically focused, even in a local area, you should have a global mindset. The reason being is you may have a competitor from a foreign country here, one. And so you still have to be concerned about competitors who may be coming home base somewhere else, have access to certain kinds of resources, different kinds of resources than you have, and you have to compete against them. You have to understand them. Two, something that happens in another part of the world may affect you even though it's not directly related to your industry per se or directly related to your company or your competitor's company. But it can affect you. It may cut off access to resources. It may raise or increase the price of energy. See, there's an indirect effect, so on and so forth. Now, you say, well, all right, I can see that, but we're all in the same boat, so what can I do? I'll just react to it when it happens. Well, let me give an example of something. Southwest Airlines is probably an overused example, but I'm going to go beyond this. Obviously, it's been a very successful airlines in an industry that hasn't enjoyed a lot of success. And we know that. But beyond that, we had a time not too long ago when the oil prices increased dramatically, really dramatically, and that really hurt that industry. Southwest was hurt less than any of those other companies at that time. Why? Because they were prepared for it, because they had hedged against it in terms of their contracts and so forth. And they were one of the few, if any, of those competitors who had done it. So here's what I'm trying to tell you. You have to look out. You have to have a vision. You have to have a global mindset. Is it because that they're dealing? They don't fly internationally, so they don't have to compete in international markets. But the energy price, they are affected by changes in the energy price, and that's a major cost to an airline. So by hedging, maybe it wasn't because they have a global mindset, but I'm trying to tell you, you should have one. That's just, again, an example of being prepared, not waiting for the event to happen to you and then react. Be prepared, proact, and you'll be ahead of the game. And that helped them then continue to compete. Therefore, they continued to make profits when many of their competitors did not in that industry. In fact, almost none of them did. All right, you know the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, which are the four primary large and very impactful emerging markets and their effect on the global economy. In fact, as you probably know, China now is the second largest economy in the world. It just surpassed Japan, and much quicker than it was projected. It has always been projected that it would pass Japan. And by the way, you probably know that it also, if you go out a ways, it's been projected that it will become the largest economy in the world, to surpass which one? The U.S. The U.S. Okay, another very important point, in my opinion, is entrepreneurship and innovation. And I'm going to give some examples of this in a minute to kind of make my point even more strongly of why this is important and what you have to do. But I would suggest to you that I don't care what kind of organization you're talking about, whether it's a new organization or a large existing organization, you should always be entrepreneurial and trying to be innovative in many of the things that you do. Part of that is in new businesses, but you can be innovative in other ways in some of the administrative capacities and help you then do things more efficiently, which also can help you compete from a cost standpoint. Now, let's just briefly, whoops, I pressed the wrong one, going backwards. That this could be an identifying opportunity, so you have to be alert. You have to have a culture that promotes and encourages being more innovative. And you have to invest in this and be willing to invest even in new ventures in order to do this. And again, I guess I could go back to Apple and say there's an example of a very innovative firm and one that has not only become a leader in you might say its primary industry. In fact, you don't know what is its primary industry because right now it's into a number of different industries and again has transformed those industries through its innovativeness. And then the other part is in managing resources. And that means you have to acquire resources, you have to bundle them right, you have to create capabilities with them, and you have to then leverage those effectively. I'll talk a little bit about this, although I'm not going to talk about all of it. We don't have a lot of time. I'll focus on some specific types of resources, and you'll see this. Obviously, execution is important in terms of making things happen. You know, one of the things I find is a lot of firms actually develop the right strategies, but they fail in the implementation of those strategies, in the execution of them. For example, I've been very interested for a number of years in mergers and acquisitions and examining those. Now, sometimes they make acquisitions they shouldn't make, so there's no doubt that they've made errors there. But there are other times they've made acquisitions that probably could be very effective. There's a lot of potential synergy, but they fail in the implementation because they don't integrate those firms effectively. And in fact, they may lose a lot of the potential synergy because of poor implementation, poor integration. So this is an issue. And then what we'll talk about is social capital or building relationships. Now you may think this is an odd thing to talk about as resources, but you'll see this in a minute. I hope you'll understand when we talk about this in just a little bit more detail. So we're going to talk about these. I won't talk about all of this. I'm going to really focus more on the latter two right now. But let me give you some examples on the entrepreneurship and innovation. Now I'm going to talk first, I'm going to give you some examples of companies. This is Priceline.com. You probably have heard, some of you have heard of it. It started in the mid-1990s, when the internet really became kind of blossomed and people started really using it, so it's 15 years ago. And this was a company that had a very unique idea and applied to business called a reverse auction, as noted there, where essentially you essentially allow the customer to name the price and then allow the companies to decide if they will accept that or not. So it's a reverse auction where, you know, the auction normally they have the product and then the customers bid on that. Here they have the customer and say the customer what the customer will pay, and then the different airlines are, in this case because they went to airlines first, say whether they'll match that or meet it and whether they'll sell them that service for that price. Now you say, all right, this idea came from an entrepreneur, and to apply it in this way. And then start looking, well, where do we apply this? Well, let's look at different industries. Where would this work best? And then they discovered that airlines, on a regular basis, on an annual basis, fly, let's say in the U.S., fly at this time, flew with almost 1 million seats unfilled. Now that's over a year, so that's a lot of times, a lot of airlines, et cetera. But 1 million seats unfilled. Now that is actually a perishable good because once you've flown that route with an unfilled seat, you can never recoup the revenue from that particular seat. And that's the one part. They say, well, they fly because people won't pay the price. And the other thing they said, well, you know, I'll bet there are people out there that would fly and would go to these places if the price was right. So maybe we could use this reverse auction in airlines. And lo and behold, that's what they proposed. They got a few airlines to go along with them. And as you see, in the first 6 weeks, they sold over 10,000 airline tickets, and their total revenues in the first 4 years of operation were over $4 billion. There evidently was a market. Now that's the first part of the story. Great idea, excellent idea, found a place where it could apply using new technology, all kinds of opportunity here. Looks really positive. And the value of this company shot up and so on. Well, there's another thing that happens. If you have a great idea in a market, people look at that and say, there's opportunity there. And so what it does is it invites competitors and competition. In fact, some of the airlines looked at this and said, wow, why didn't we think of that? Well, they could have, but they didn't. So you look at this, I'm just showing you some of the competitors that came online fairly quickly, not real quickly, about a year or so they started looking at this and came on. But Microsoft, Expedia, actually basically imitated everything that Priceline.com did. Now, the other thing you know is they actually patented that reverse auction system. So you say, okay, now how did they imitate it like that? Well, think about this. You are a small company, even though this is a successful company, you have a certain amount of resources. If you want to fight for your patent, you can do this, but you got to go to court. Now, I don't know about you, but my lawyer costs a lot of money when I go to my lawyer, and then you have court costs and so on else. And by the way, just winning a case won't help you because they can appeal it. So you got to win it several times. And you're fighting, in this case, a little company that's got billions of dollars of resources. Now what I'm telling you is that they finally decided they couldn't fight them. And this happens a lot in small firms, unfortunately. I'm not trying to in any way impugn other companies or anything else. I'm just telling you a fact of life that sometimes happens, and it happens in this case. So they couldn't fight that even though they had a patent, they had a right, they couldn't fight it. And the others were smart enough, they didn't really just imitate, they changed. They made some changes such that it was not exactly the same, but they could still compete. Now there was another thing that happened with this. So they weren't prepared to anyway put barriers up to stop the competition. It would have been hard to do. But they also didn't do things to stay ahead. These competitors, the other things that these fast second movers do is they look at what you're doing and they say, well, how can we improve it? So we can capture those customers. And so we can capture them and pull them away from Priceline.com. So they started saying, well, you know, when you fly, some people like to go on to rent cars, and they generally, oftentimes, need hotel rooms, etc. We can sell packages. And they did. And they started pulling, and they found some other little glitches where they could do it more efficiently or better. And they started pulling customers away from Priceline.com. So, moral of this story is that Priceline.com should have done that. They should have had the idea to add packages in there and stay ahead of this competition. If they couldn't block it out, they should have stayed ahead. They didn't do that. Now, Priceline.com almost went under. They went through a series of CEOs and so on. It was highly successful, very entrepreneurial, and yet it almost then went under because the competitors came in and started taking market share away from them. And so the moral of this story is, even if you're a small entrepreneurial firm, you better be strategic. You better watch out for the competitors. You need to prepare for that and deal with that and stay ahead of your competition. If you have a competitive advantage, keep it. You don't have it forever. And they're always going to be looking for your weakness and going for it. So you got to stay ahead of them. Now let's go the other way. Let's look at some other companies. I don't even know if you know about Polaroid. You heard about it. Polaroid at one time was one of the largest firms in America. And it started with an entrepreneur who had a great idea of instant photography. And so developed this technology where you could take and built a company around it where you could build and have an instant photograph rather than having film, send it off, have it developed, and bring it back. Great idea. And built it into a major company. And it was large for a long time, a major, well-respected company, and then a technology that was developed in another industry was imported into this industry and took market share away from this company. I mean, took it away totally. Because your cell phone now, you can take photographs using this technology. Or you may have a very sophisticated camera where you can take it with using digital technology. And you look at this and say, well, why didn't Polaroid do this? They should have. In fact, they saw it now coming and they started trying to develop it, but they couldn't get it out fast enough. And others brought in, introduced their products, and literally dried up their cash flow, period, to zero almost. So they didn't have the resources to continue on. They did declare bankruptcy, and in this case, they didn't continue on. It went out. So it went from a top 50 to zero for not being entrepreneurial. That can happen. Look at another, Blockbuster. Blockbuster was another very successful entrepreneurial firm. Started building stores. You may even still see some Blockbuster stores around that rent videos and so on, and they had the idea that they could take it away from the local, which is largely local, and they did. And they, by building these stores all over and building almost kind of super video stores because they carry larger inventories, etc., and really became the dominant firm in this market. And then this little firm called Netflix came along by an entrepreneur. He had an idea of doing something. He said, well, we could do this by mail. We don't have to have these big superstores. We could do this by mail. And by the way, there's another little catch he found that I don't know if any of you ever rented videos through Blockbuster, but one of the keys, they charge late fees if you didn't get them back. That makes sense. They have to have them back in order to rent them to others, so they're losing revenue, so they're charging you a late fee if you don't get it back. But, you know, if you look at it, they actually didn't want you to get it back because 40% of their revenues, at one time, 40% of their revenues came from late fees. So they really then became dependent on the late fees. And Netflix said, we won't charge late fees. No late fees. So they started getting market share away. And they did other things to pull them away. And then there are others like Redbox. And, of course, we got satellite rentals, all kinds of things now. Blockbuster started moving this direction, but not soon enough. They let all these other competitors come in with, in one sense, Netflix wasn't a new technology, really, using the mail system, postal system, originally. So they took away their market share because they weren't entrepreneurial enough, and Blockbuster has recently filed for bankruptcy. Barnes & Noble, actually one of my favorite companies. They sell books on a lot to college students. They have been for a long number of years. And in fact, it's another one of these large companies now built by an entrepreneur. And the founder is still involved in the company, although he's not as involved as he once was. His son was the CEO and now is the chair of the board. So it's even kind of a family company. But Blockbuster's in trouble, primarily because of the change in technology today of using what we use. Of course, it's Amazon that came in back 15 years ago and started taking market share away from Blockbuster, and they weren't ready for it. You might say they see that, but today, the electronic books, et cetera, we could see this was coming for a long time. I'll bet several of you have electronic books you use in classes that you have now, or at least have the opportunity to do that if you want to. You may use the printed version or electronic. Soon, that's going to be the way it is all the way. You don't need these large corner bookstores to sell books anymore. They're all going to be electronic, or majority will be. And there'll be other ways to do it. So what's happened here is it hadn't gone out of business, but it's in trouble. I personally wouldn't invest money in it. It's been offered for sale, and so far it hasn't had any takers. Now, all I'm trying to point out to you, I'm giving you negative examples, but all I'm trying to point out to you is it's important to be both strategic and entrepreneurial. Strategic and entrepreneurial. In order to be successful, you have to be both, and I don't care if you're a new firm, a young firm, or an old established firm, you have to be strategic and entrepreneurial to survive and stay in business and be successful. So what this says right here is strategic entrepreneurship is defined as seeking to establish and sustain or maintain a competitive advantage while simultaneously trying to identify new business opportunities. Always trying to stay ahead. You want to stay ahead of the competition, maintain a competitive advantage, and you've got to be innovative. In fact, honestly, the way to maintain or establish a new competitive advantage is you have to do it through being entrepreneurial. So that lens is important. I actually believe strongly in this notion of strategic entrepreneurship for that reason. Now, let's talk about some of the resources. I'm not going to talk about all the resources. This is not to suggest other resources are unimportant. Obviously, financial resources are critically important. And so are technological resources. So I'm not going to talk about those, not because they're unimportant, because we don't have time. And I'm going to focus on a couple of others that maybe you may or may not have seen the importance of. One is human capital. And I use the term human capital because I like to use the capital portion with that. So people, when they're thinking about it, they think about it just like they do financial capital or social capital or technological capital. It's a capital. It's a resource. It's an asset to the firm. In fact, very critically important. How many organizations would be successful if you took all the people out? What would they do? I don't know of any. Now, maybe when we really perfect artificial intelligence, there's some that could work. But not yet. We're not there yet, and so we really need human capital, and it's very critical. And the way you manage, use, develop human capital is critical. And let's just look at some CEOs that have talked about this. Ed Breen is the CEO of Tyco, and I like what he says, is that we compete with our brains as well as our brawn. And so if you really want to compete against others, you don't only try to out-hustle them, you also need to outthink them. So it's right up here as part of it. Obviously, there are other things you do. You use the resources available, and all of those resources are important, but this is an important one. And then another one, Ann Mulcahy, who I have a lot of respect for because she took over this company called Xerox when it was in real trouble. And in fact, when she took it over, it was in such trouble, a lot of analysts and others recommended to her that she should just sell it, sell the assets. This is the best thing you could do. Don't try to manage it. It's just going to go downhill and you'll lose all of the value of it. Well, she disagreed and she stayed with it. And you can see her comments. Now, she's done several things. Human capital is not the only thing, but she has emphasized the critical point of having good human capital, and she used it very effectively and brought Xerox back to prominence, to success. Very successful. She's no longer involved in it. She was the chair. She moved up from CEO to chair of the board, and now has just recently stepped out. But she was a very successful leader, partly, and emphasized human capital. Now let's talk about why. What is the most unique resource you have? It's human capital. Now let me go back to you. You may or may not have had this. I'm not going to really go into a lot of depth. But how do you gain a competitive advantage? Well, frankly, you have to do something. You have to provide value to a customer that's superior to what anything competitors can provide. That's how you gain a competitive advantage. So how do you do that? You have to do something differently and better. And then so you look back and how do you do that? Well, one way you do it is through your human capital. Now, where do the ideas come from for developing the new technology? Where did the ideas come from for the new technologies that Apple introduced? Well, they started with people, with ideas from people, and then groups and teams of people that developed those and put it together. Where do the ideas come from? When you go out and go for a company and you've got where you feel you've gained superior service, it's people that have provided that, and ideas of how they do that. They outdo. So it's through the human capital. So it's the most unique form. It's a way to gain and maintain a competitive advantage. And I also would say, go back to the point by Ed Breen, if you're going to outthink them, you got to go back and say, how do you do that? It's with the knowledge base. Where does the knowledge reside in companies? Well, it largely resides with the human capital, with the people. Now, I briefly implied this, but didn't talk about it much when I said in mergers and acquisitions, they fail oftentimes because they do poor implementation, poor integration. Well, what happens a lot in that is they fail to use the knowledge base and the knowledge resources of the firm they acquire. And that is probably the most valuable asset they have. Now, certainly access to Technology, access to products, access to markets and customers can be critical. But how do you maintain all that? Is it just going to stay where it is today? You got to have the human capital to keep building. And then oftentimes it's the people that are behind it that make it happen. You know, when I was in industry, when I got involved, got very interested in merger and acquisition, I worked for a company that was acquired. And I sat there and observed, and I knew the people pretty well, and I watched what happened after it was acquired. The best people started leaving. And I got thinking, this company bought our company, and now the best people they have who could help really build this and make it valuable to them are leaving the company. So they lost the opportunity to really gain the synergy that was possible there. So in fact, that's what I'm talking about. Knowledge is there. You got to use that knowledge. Use it, build it, develop it, and find ways to use it and motivate the people. You got to lead them in ways that they want to use their knowledge for the use in this organization and make it better and go forward. So that has a lot to do with the way they're led, the way they are, of course, rewarded and so on, all that takes into account there. So it's the knowledge, how to use that knowledge, how to leverage it and so forth, take it forward. Now let's talk about social capital. I told you, use that term. There actually is an academic term called social capital. I'm going to use it in a little different way, although it's same basic meaning. I'm just going to put it in different terminology. But it deals with relationships. You think about it. It's relationships with what? What do you have in terms of relationships in organizations? Well, first, very important, you have relationships with customers. You know, I tend to go back to companies where I feel a connection, where I feel, of course, where I've been treated well or where I've gotten really excellent service, but oftentimes there's also a personal, I almost felt personal relationship, even if it's with a big company. I trust. I either trust their products or they deal with me in a humane way, in a way that with respect and so forth. So your relationship with a customer is really critical. And it means not only the current sale, but future sales for you. Relationship with suppliers. Well, you know, again, companies that really know this well know suppliers can be extremely critical to them in terms of providing the kinds of supplies, quality, quantity at the right time. And a lot of this has to do with their input. You know, I studied and worked with a company once that had a new product development, and they included some of their suppliers on their new product development team. So those suppliers were willing to provide inputs, and they used their inputs in developing new products. Of course, that links in your suppliers, so they know that's going to be valuable to them, but you're using their knowledge, and they gave you that knowledge, they use them. There's a strong bond. And guarantee when they needed help, if they needed them to do something for them, they're going to be right there to help them do it. So that relationship is critical. And a lot of times these strategic alliances, particularly across borders within other countries, that relationship becomes extremely critical to be successful. And if they fail because of poor relationships sometimes. And this just say with other stakeholders in the community. We talked about the greening and sustainability and what you do and how you treat, if you will, the stakeholders in the community. And we talk about a broader community. But a relationship with partners in other ways. There are all kinds of partners. You can look at suppliers, but I mentioned strategic alliances just briefly a minute ago. And those could even be in the same industry as you and, say, in other countries to help you move into their markets. But those relationships become critical. Now, building reputation and building your brand. Let me come back, because these are both important. I saw a statistic. I can't tell you that this is exactly accurate. I just read this a couple of days ago, and I need to see if I can find a way to validate it, but I'm going to go and tell you with the caveat that I haven't validated this yet. But I was reading somewhere where a person said that in the early 1980s, about 62% of the firm value came from their hard assets or fixed assets, building and technology that you could, not the technology that's kind of vague, but just say hard technology, hard product. And then they said today that 85% of the value comes from intangible assets. Now, of course, I'm sure this varies by industry and so on, but this is a generalized statement. I can believe this, though. It comes from, and that includes human capital and the knowledge, and social capital and relationships. And they included brand in there as one of those. So I tell you that all of this is important in the firm value, today in particular. So you look at Southwest Airlines, they want to be the employer of choice. Why? Because then they get the pick of the employees. Now they try to get employees who match what they want to do, to match their culture. And I also know in talking to those employees, they really get the cream of the crop. A few years ago, they were in a time period, I know in an annual period, they had about 5,000 jobs that were open. Some of those, of course, were people retiring. Some were new jobs are being created for growth. They had over 130,000 applications for 5,000 jobs. Now, what that tells you is that they get the cream. They get to pick the best. So if you get that. And that's what you want. You want to be known as that. So they had a brand for a place to work. And that's what you'd want, so you attract the human capital. That's relationship too, by the way. They have a relationship. So it could be the supplier of choice, it could be a neighbor of choice, fits these other points that I made up here earlier. And alliances really are critical to most firms because they provide access to complementary resources. Almost no firm in the world has all the resources they need to take advantage of the opportunities that exist, and sometimes even to do what they do right now. Now, they could have all kinds of cash setting available, et cetera, but you still have to have this broad spectrum of resources, and these two are very important, human capital and social capital, in order to do what you want to do, and particularly all over the world. So a critical part of this is these alliances give you access to complementary resources in other parts of the world. I would tell you that, in fact, they give you access to resources you probably wouldn't have many times, and they help you then use those resources if you have a good relationship with these with your partners, because that may not be suppliers. They give you information about markets, technology, suppliers, government regulations, government contacts, and so on in other countries. So, and access to knowledge. Now, kind of to end this, I want to end with just a few points. You're going to see quotes here, and I'll just make a few points to kind of end the discussion. One is, if you look at it, in order to be successful, and I don't care how large or small you are, you need to be flexible. Part of this is because of the turbulence you see. You can't predict everything that's going to happen, and you got to be ready to meet and deal with these new contingencies that exist. And I go back to a quote from Paul Nutt, who is a professor at Ohio State, but he studied business decisions over time, corporate decisions. And he claims that of those he studied, and he's done this his whole career, approximately 50% of these fail, which suggests you got to be ready when they fail to take action. So not everything you do is going to succeed, and you got to be ready to follow that up. Ethical practices. I don't think I have to tell you that. I know that's important in your study and in your programs here, and all I want to do is just tell you that I fully agree. And all I can tell you is if you ever follow some practice that is ethically challenged, somewhere along the line it'll catch up with you. Now, invariably, when I say this, I get a student who'll ask me, well, you know, I know about X over here that did this, and he walked away with $30 million or something. Well, X may have walked away with $30 million, but was that the reward? And what does he have? I know a person that I was on a program with called, he got the name of Chainsaw Al, because he went into corporation. Some of you know who he is. And he went into corporation. He was known for really downsizing and taking a lot of selling the assets off and making them look profitable. He called Chainsaw because of that, and he really maybe didn't make them so profitable over the long term, but he made them look that way in the short term. But in his last one, he did some things that were very ethically challenged, and he left. And he's been interviewed since, and you know, he would say he wishes he hadn't done it. He walked away very wealthy, but he wishes he hadn't done it. because, you know, he's got money, but, you know, there's a lot more to life than just that. Now, I would tell you if you stay with it, you may not have the money either. They may take that away from you too. But I'm just trying to give you a feel that there are a lot of other things that come with this. I also will say, this is another quote from a couple of people I know, Rita McGrath and Ian McMillan. And they talk about uncertainty. We deal with uncertainty today. If you've got a lot of turbulence, there's a lot of uncertainty. It can be used to your benefit, as they claim, if you got an entrepreneurial mindset. In fact, they claim, and I agree with them, oftentimes when things are uncertain is the opportune time to step in with new ideas. That everybody's got the same problems and having to deal with it, and that may be the time when you can really take market share. If you've got a little bit of a willingness to take risks, but also you've got good ideas, and if you're ready to do that. So having an entrepreneurial mindset, again, is a way to do it. Now, another quote that I use is one from Gary Hamel. And just to say you don't take an entrepreneurial mindset. This is what Gary Hamel is, a former strategy professor, but he also is a well-known consultant these days and has his own company, Strategos. And I like this quote because he said the revolutionaries, and he goes kind of extreme here, revolutionaries, talking about those that really are entrepreneurial, will take your markets, then they'll take your customers, they'll take your best employees, and finally they'll take the rest of your assets. And if you look at this, now just go back to the example I gave you of Polaroid. That's clearly what at least happened to a degree, because the ones who were entrepreneurial came in and took their customers away. And they didn't want their assets. So they took their customers away, and they didn't take anything else away. They took away all sales and all revenue flow. And the last one is by Andy Grove. And if you know who Andy Grove is, he's a former CEO of Intel. And he isn't the one who started Intel, but he is the one who developed Intel into the major corporation it is today. And he wrote a book, and the title of the book was Only the Paranoid Survive. And essentially what this suggests, this sounds a little bit wild or out, what he's trying to tell you is exactly what I told you earlier about Priceline.com, is you got to be ready for your competitors and be ahead of those, stay a step ahead of your competitors, always trying to do things. And I'll bring this home with one example to end this discussion. I had some executives in a class from Intel just a few years ago, and they were telling me this story about a new product they brought to the market in this year. Right at the beginning of the year, they brought this new product to the market, and it was highly successful. And it was built up revenue flow real quickly. And they said in December, beginning of December of that year, they brought out a new product that cannibalized that product. And I said, oh, well, geez, then that means that new product they brought out in January must have already started sales declining. So, oh, no. So sales were still increasing at an increasing rate, and we projected that they would have probably done so for 3 or 4 years. So why would you do this? Why would you cannibalize your own product in your own markets? He said, so our competitors can't do it. And said that is the strategy of Intel, that they will do anything to stay ahead of their competitors so competitors don't take their market share away. And so this is what they've done and why Intel is the corporation it is today by doing things like this. Now, you may or may not agree with the paranoid, but you can say that you need to be consistently and concerned about being entrepreneurial and strategic. And that's what that says to me. I hope you've gotten some decent ideas today or things you might take away. I would tell you, I really do believe in what we've talked about. We've really only brushed some of the key topics, but you are the future leaders, and I wish you the best. I'm happy to answer any questions if we have any time.
We have time for 1 or 2 questions. I'll just make an observation then if there are no questions, and the observation is this. If you and I are not young any longer, Mike, but if you were young, wouldn't you want to be facing a world that had a lot of environmental turbulence in it if you had an entrepreneurial mindset?
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
I mean, that's really where the opportunity lies.
That's where it is. That's where it is.
The good news for these young people here today is the world is not all figured out. All industries haven't got it exactly nailed down. In fact, there is incredible opportunity in each and every industry that you can imagine. And our job is just to help you gain the skills and attitudes and mindsets that will enable you to go out and take advantage of those opportunities. Won't you join me in thanking Professor Hitt for this wonderful lecture? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now we need to quickly move out because another class starts up here at 1:45.